citizens' breakfast. Good morning, gentlemen. In trying to prepare and get my head around today's presentation, I did some traipsing around on the internet and found a report that's now a dozen years old, from 2001, the Department of Justice. A report on gun violence reduction, National Integrated Firearms Violence Reduction Strategy. And in the appendix of that report, there's a short paragraph which I'll share with you on the District of Vermont. The federal district in Vermont is one unified district. So the District of Vermont's efforts to combat firearms violence in the state are shaped by two realities. First, federal law enforcement has a unique responsibility to combat the acquisition and possession of firearms by criminals in Vermont because the state has no laws prohibiting the possession of firearms by persons prohibited under federal law. Second, the most pervasive form of violent crime in the state results from domestic disputes. It then goes on to say what the strategy was in 2001. But fast forward to today, a dozen years later, and we're going to hear from Ann Braden with Gun Sense Vermont about what the current law is and what some proposed future changes might be.
Thanks very much for having me today. The short answer for what's changed is that nothing has changed since then. And that's in terms of the laws. One thing that has happened and changed, though, is that domestic violence is still very much an issue, but also now suicide rates have been rising over the last decade, and we are now the 12th highest state in the nation in terms of suicide rates. All of this, though, is something that I did not know at all a year ago. Just to give you some background on myself, I got involved in this issue after the massacre in Newtown, and for me, it woke me up to this idea that, there was not a normal, rational discussion being had about this issue. That people were not looking at, okay, what's the problem and how can we fix it? All those articles that came out after the Sandy Hook shooting, they were all talking about, maybe not all of them, but there was many talking about how, there had been systematic efforts to make sure that there wasn't research happening about firearms, that there was efforts to make sure that the ATF wasn't able to do the job that it needed to be able to do, and all these things showed that there was just this organized movement to try to keep any sort of basic public safety laws from working. And so I was pretty angry about that. My mom lives in Newtown, and so when that happened, for me, it was a very visceral thing. I pictured that elementary school. I didn't just picture a crime scene, I pictured this regular elementary school, with regular kids, and I know that community, and it's not one where you think, oh, like, I can imagine that happening. It was very clear that if that could happen there, it could happen anywhere. And so I don't feel like we can stop all violence, from happening, but I do feel like we have a responsibility to sort of look at the laws that we have and make sure that they make sense and make sure that we're doing the job that we need to be doing to protect communities. And so I started learning about Vermont laws and what we were doing here at the state, and it was suddenly obviously clear that we were not doing basically anything to keep guns out of the wrong hands. That there was some federal laws, and we basically relied on those federal laws, even though there was giant holes in those even, to make sure that someone who's irresponsible was not getting a weapon. At the State House, they would sort of take up this issue last session, but there was such a strong reaction to any proposed changes from the gun lobby that it was clear that, this was not something where the state wasn't ready to have a conversation about this yet. There needed to be an organized movement saying, we have to have a conversation about this. We have to be discussing this. We can discuss this in a rational way. We can look at what are the problems, what can we do to help prevent guns from falling into the wrong hands and see what we can do. And so last March, we got started as Gun Sense Vermont. And we've grown pretty quickly. We had like 0 in March, and then 1, and now we have about 1,600 people that have signed up as members on our email list. And so it's very 160 different towns in Vermont. And so it's something where there's a lot of people we're just sort of, it's the silent majority, we're trying to get the silent majority speaking on this issue. There's just so much common ground in this issue, and it's not discussed a lot because the issue can be so emotional and so polarizing. And so we're really trying to make sure that the common ground places, places where there's so much, so much, where there's all this common ground, are the places where we look at and we try to take action there rather than just having people yell at each other. There's this sort of general consensus that, there's certain groups of people that should not have access to firearms, like unsupervised children, and, violent felons, and domestic abusers, and, people who have been adjudicated by a court of law saying, you are a danger to yourself or to others. So I feel like there's this consensus there, and so to build on that and say, okay, we agree that there's certain people that shouldn't have access for them, for their own safety in some cases. And so how can we better enforce the laws that we have and fill in some gaps to make sure that we're doing a better job to keep them from getting firearms? And so one proposal that we're putting forward is just the idea of a better background check. At the moment, when someone applies for a federal background check, it checks sort of criminal database, but there's absolutely no mental health data in that. There's no data if someone's just gotten a protection order for domestic abuse. That's not included. And so to make sure that there's a complete access, a complete set of data that is being triggered when someone files for a background check, that would be a wonderful step to take. We're also talking a lot about safe storage. There's significant research with suicides, especially, that having a safe storage law can significantly reduce the number of teen suicides. The statistics, a lot of people will say, well, if someone wants to kill themselves, we're going to find a way. But actually, the statistics are very convincing to show that that's not the case. So if someone's suicidal, they're suicidal for about, the majority of people are suicidal for less than 5 minutes. So that is this tiny window that you need to make sure that they do not have access to an easy out in that window. And if you pass that window, what's really sort of inspiring is that 90% of people who have one suicidal episode go on to, and don't succeed in committing suicide. They go on to live a normal life. So that's 90% of people that get them through that window without having access to a gun. They've gotten through it. And we can support them with mental health support as much as we can. But it's one of those things where you think, okay, this is a tool that we can really do, we can really make a difference here. And so when you commit suicide with a firearm, you're successful 85% of the time. It works. And when you use pills or poison, you're successful between 2 and 15% of the time. So it's a huge difference in the effectiveness of the method. And so that's why that's why it has to be part of the equation when we're talking about suicide prevention. And actually, when you look at the differences between states, the states that have higher gun ownership have significantly higher suicide rates also. And so this is something where it's not that there has to be less guns, but it's that we have to do work to make sure that those guns aren't getting into the wrong hands. And so so background checks and safe storage, and also our Vermont Act happens to be the only one of the only 2 states in the nation that doesn't have a state law prohibiting violent felons from possessing weapons. It's the federal law, but we don't reinforce that like other states do with their own state law. And so that means that local law enforcement have to refer incidents that come up to the ATF, and because of a wide variety of reasons, we do not have that many ATF agents in the state. And so if it's just, well, this violent felon has a gun, that basically doesn't have to get prosecuted. There has to be something else. And so, if we can bring state law in line with federal law, then that means that, we're giving another tool to our law enforcement officers to help make sure that, we don't have, it's not so easy for violent felons. There's this guns for drugs trade that is, it's easy to get access to a gun here. We have markets for drugs, and what it does is not only is it bringing drugs in, but it's just sort of it's creating this environment where it's easy and it kind of makes sense for criminals to come into our neighborhoods where there isn't that draw otherwise as much. And so it's sort of creating this environment that is not good for our state at all. The fact that nothing got out of committee last session, it means that, as individuals, we need to be standing up and saying, hey, you need to be discussing this. Like, this is an important issue because it's a hard issue to discuss because it is so emotional, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. I really feel like this is a place where there's so much common ground, and we as Vermont can be like, we can show that you can be pro-hunting and you can be pro-responsibility in terms of gun ownership. And this isn't about, what guns can people own, it's about who is responsible and making sure that responsible people are the ones that have guns and that the people that are not responsible don't have access to guns. So that's the agenda that we're pushing for, and it's really been such a positive experience to have people coming together around this, because it really is something where there's a disconnect between what we sort of feel like should be happening in Vermont and what actually, the actual state of the gun laws. And because there basically aren't any gun laws. There's like 9. Like, we do a great job of hunting laws, and we could use that as a model to protect our communities also, But this is an issue that we have to be willing to step into this place where people are discussing things and looking at the actual facts of what problems exist, and looking at all the states around us that have done, there's lots of different tools that we can be putting into place. We don't have to reinvent anything. Someone else has done all. They've been addressing this, and so really, I feel like the focus has been to just get people speaking up. We have our website, gunsensevermont.org. It's gunsenseVT.org. We have a number of ways that you can get involved, like join our email list. And we've been also collecting petition signatures for Governor Shumlin. Governor Shumlin is, at this point, he's been saying, we don't need to make any changes. He did do a great thing last week to support storage for firearms, because in domestic violence cases, a lot of times what happens is they seize the guns after court order. They seize the guns, but then there's no place to put the guns, and so they would often end up going back to the person, or going back to a family member, who then bringing it back to the person. So the governor is supporting storage facilities that could give a place to put guns. That's sort of the level that we're at. Like, we don't even. We need to be able to enforce the laws. We need to. If this person shouldn't have a weapon, then let's make sure that happens. And so that's a lot of what we've been doing.
When I first met Anne, she came to the Women's Freedom Center with this gorgeous baby strapped onto her body. And I thought, here's this woman who feels passionate enough in early motherhood to be really working the town and talking about something that affects us all. And I have great faith in the state of Vermont for so many reasons. I think that the people of Vermont really think about issues. I think we're able to hold complex ideas and passions side by side. And 25 years into the domestic violence movement in this community, I want to tell you that the number of women and children whose lives are threatened and taken, quite frankly, by their intimate partners who have access to firearms, even when there have been numerous relief from abuse orders issued in the past, documented horrendous violence. There's just, at this point in time, no excuse for those offenders not having their guns taken away from them. And I say that having dear friends who support their families through cold and long winters by hunting. So those two things are not in opposition for me. And I think what we need to do is to really go into the emotional issues. This is not a freedom. It's not a concept of freedom. It's not anyone wanting to take anyone's rights away. And I think Anne has said that articulately and passionately. But the storage issue around firearms has been historically so unreasonable. The number of conversations I've had with law enforcement, the Windham County Sheriff, the Brat PD, the smaller police departments who say, you know, Donna, I would love to take his gun. It is risky for him to have it, but we can't do that until it's legal for us because the gun might rust and Vermont doesn't have the funds. Vermont doesn't have the funds to reimburse that violent offender for his weapon if something happens to it. And I'm saying, but he has held it to her temple. He has done that in the presence of their children. So we really need to move forward on this issue, and I urge you all to get involved. And I thank you, Anne, so much for being here bright and early with the very full life that I know you live.
Well, thank you for that very eloquent presentation. This is a friendly, not a hostile question, and also had an observation. If you could have all the gun legislation that you wanted, and I'm assuming you're probably at the progressive end of views on but maybe not. If you could have everything you wanted from the Vermont at the state level, what would that look like? And then, if I may, I have an observation.
I really would like to see, you know, a strong number of measures that say, okay, we really take this seriously. We are not going to let firearms get into the wrong hands. For me, like, if you're talking about the assault weapon ban or high capacity magazine bans, I personally don't feel like that they make sense. There just isn't the research to show that they make a difference in public safety nearly as much as what you know, stronger background checks can do. What you know, they're sort of the more mundane issues, but they're the ones that really make a difference. And so my wish list is sort of, you know, looking at background checks and tougher gun trafficking laws and safe storage and making sure that, you know, if domestic violence incident has happened and there's no court order yet, you can still temporarily seize firearms so that you can get sort of just for 5 days just to have a cooling off period. You know, and so just things that are, I mean, some of them are small things, but together they add up to a much more vigorous safety net to make sure that guns are staying in the right hands.
My own sort of thought on gun, broadly on national illegal gun use is that guns don't kill people, bullets do. And if every bullet, a law required that every bullet be etched with the manufacturer's name, the retailer's name, and the purchaser's name, and that there was a mandatory and a severe penalty, rather like driving a car without a license. If you were found with with ammunition that didn't have those three requirements, wouldn't that go a long way to sobering up the gun society and making it more difficult to have liberal gun use?
I think I feel like the gun society in general is very responsible, and a lot they're they're getting a bad rap for a very small number of people, but I do think there's ways like through technology that we can really improve the connection You know, they've also talked about, you know, guns that are able to only be fired by the owner. And I think that we're ways off in terms of years before that's an affordable option. But if it was an affordable option, I mean, that sounds fabulous. You know, just because then you have, I mean, that responsible firearm owner. Not only they don't have to, you know, they don't have someone trying to steal their gun as much. You know, it's. I think it would be better for everyone.
My name is Nancy. I'm curious to know what the steps would be for, I guess this would have to be a grassroots effort, much like the Vermont Yankee effort was, with lots of marches and lots of uncomfortable confrontations at the plant. I'm wondering what the steps would be for this town and Vermont towns to become more proactive in bringing this to the legislature. I'm very naive about this. I don't know much about how you get the legislature's attention. But certainly I learned a lot. Certainly I learned a lot from the Vermont Yankee stuff. So I'm curious to know.
Legislation. I can tell you the reason nothing ever happened last year was because the bills that were introduced were so far over. They were banning all assault rifles, limiting the magazine size, all of those things. And that's where the gun owners objected, and it became an emotional issue. And so if I talked about guns, somebody said, "You don't know what an assault rifle is." And I said, "You're right, I don't have a clue what it is." And so I think that using the more reason and less what people might see as the ideal approach is going to make more of a difference, and that's where you're going to get us.
I just see, I mean, I don't know how many people here remember Peter Smith. He was elected to the Congress by U.S. By Vermonters, but if anybody doesn't remember him, it's because he advocated gun control, and that was the end of him as a politician. I know in Colorado, the people elected senators who were pro-gun control, and the lobby is so powerful that your career will be ended. It's been shown over and over again. So if you convince people, then you're asking them to commit suicide in a way, political suicide.
I'm not so sure that that's entirely true. I think it's true when you're talking about extreme proposals. I don't think it's true when you're talking about safe storage and better background checks, the kinds of things Ann is talking about. I don't know that that's true. I have to admit that I twice actually got an A rating from the NRA. Believe it or not, I have no idea why, but I did when they did a questionnaire. And so I think that it's not necessarily true that, and anyway here, because I believe that if we're approaching it with mundane issues, and don't call it gun control, because it's not gun control. The words you use make a huge difference, and so we're not advocating gun control or loss of your gun ownership rights or anything else. Words make a lot of difference.
So just, I think Jeanette is absolutely right that if you're pushing for this middle ground, I mean, it is a middle ground. Like, I mean, part of the reason that I feel so passionately about this is that I spent a lot of the winter and spring talking to gun owners, and there's a lot of gun owners in our group and hunters, and it was clear that the majority of gun owners are for background checks and safe storage and just being the sort of responsible gun ownership. It's something that is part of how they operate, and so what we're proposing is right in line with that. And so it's not something that is, there's still there's still a small group that will be, against any change whatsoever. They'll say it's a slippery slope, and but really, let's just talk about what's on the table, and not bring up every possible thing that could be brought up. And so I feel like, I think one of the reasons I believe so strongly in this is that I'm sort of like a champion for the middle. This is something that can bring people together rather than being polarizing force.
But I wanted to ask Ann, I know that in conversations with Governor Shumlin, that he always falls back to this notion of Vermont doesn't need to make any changes, we need a 50-state solution. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Thanks. Well, I think one piece of the idea of it needing to be a 50-state solution is that, you sort of, as the system is sort of weak based on its holes, where are the holes? And right now, Vermont is actually a hole. So, it would be great to have a 50-state solution, but we'll improve our region if we improve our laws here, and if we strengthen our laws. And so, he said, well, you can just go to another state and buy a gun. But if you make it harder, you're still making it harder for felon, for violent felons. It's just like, why make it easy for them? Let's put more obstacles up in front. More recently, I met with him a few weeks ago, and he said basically, I don't think what you're proposing will make any difference. He doesn't think that those things make a difference. And I just don't agree with that. If you look at the research, like, these are basic public safety measures. It makes common sense. If you require a gun to be stored where it's inaccessible for children, more of them will be stored where it's inaccessible for children. It doesn't mean that all of them will, but it gives weight to that idea that safe storage is important. And that's something that's, Bill Brassard of the National Sports Shooting Foundation, which is in Newtown, Connecticut actually, but they're a strong proponent of shooting sports. And he says, safe storage is absolutely critical when it comes to gun safety. This is something where it's not rocket science. It's just like, it makes sense, and it's proven to save lives.
Whether this is also a states' rights issue. Because when I was looking at the old report from DOJ, it seemed that, I said, well, if you don't have laws at the state level, then we need to improve the federal involvement in that area. Now, the feds may not have the resources to do that, but if they had the resources, then the feds would enforce the federal law. And the state would be giving up its right, really, because we've had that issue with secure communities. If you involve the feds in the action, then you may not like where that action ends up. And so whether cleaning up our own house first is really a states' rights issue.
My name is Kathy, and I've taken a few courses in suicide prevention locally.
Speak louder.
I've taken a few courses in suicide prevention, and one of the issues that came out about Vermont was that adolescent males in the state of Vermont was rated like #4 in the country for suicide by gun. And what they said is that there was an issue of a safety mechanism that was not part of the legislation in the state of Vermont, that there's some sort of gadget or mechanism that you can apply to the gun as a safety mechanism.
So trigger locks are common, I would say inexpensive, but actually they're often given out free in different places. And so that can be a good way to secure a gun so that it goes right through so that you can't be fired. There's also gun safes, which are, not free, but there's something where, like with a trigger lock, it's a little bit harder to feel like you can defend your home if you need to, like on a moment's notice. And a gun safe is something that can be used so that's very easy access to a gun, but it's also, it's secured. And so there's a couple of different ways that people can secure firearms, and that most people do.
And you may already have addressed this or in part, but I'm wondering about when Gun Sense Vermont presents its platform, its 3 3 steps. How do we respond to the person who says, this is a slippery slope, this is just the beginning, you're calling it the middle ground, and the sensible changes, but what is behind that, what comes next? I'm looking for, not necessarily a soundbite, but some response to that question.
My response is that if you have a slippery slope, it's a mountain, right? And we're on the other side of the slippery slope. We've already fallen off the other side of the mountain where there are no public safety protections. We need to climb back up to be anywhere near the middle. And so you can say it's a slippery slope, but it's there's 2 slippery slopes, and we have fallen off one, and we need to get back into the middle. I mean, that's it's very visual, and I see the little mountain.
And my response is everything we do is a slippery slope. And that's why you have people on the town select board and the legislature to make a decision. Is this the place where we put the brakes on, or is it not? But every single thing is a slippery slope. So when people give you that argument, they're not really interested in your answer at all. They just want to throw that out there because there is no real answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.